These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy week of Christmas. Today is the shortest day of the year, if I'm remembering correctly. Might have been yesterday, might have been last night, the longest night of the year, or it's tonight, one or the other. But we're on the winter solstice. And for those of us living way up north, and I certainly noticed this the years that Louise and I lived in New Hampshire and Vermont as well. Boy, when the sun goes down at 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon, you notice it. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Anyhow, happy winter solstice. The holiday, this was the day pre-Christianity when, the head priest in some village in Germany would go up on the top of a mountain and light a pine tree on fire and to reignite the sun, because the days had been getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then tomorrow and the next day and the next day, as the days get longer and longer, people will all say, oh, he did it again. Look at that. Keep him in power for another year. And thus we light Christmas trees, which are actually solstice trees. But anyway, because, Jesus wasn't lighting trees and things. In our program today, Kevin Kamps is going to drop by for an hour to talk about nuclear. We're going to do a deep dive into nuclear power in the third hour of the program. And Greg Palast has some huge news out of Georgia, and he's going to drop by in our second hour to share that with you. Boy, he actually, against my loud advice, I called him up and read him the riot act. You're getting on an airplane? What the hell? But, he flew to Georgia and he did this thing. And, knock wood, hopefully he's doing good. And, we'll hear the whole story in an hour. But I wanted to start out with two stories. one about the stimulus bill, and I'll get to that in just a minute, but the other about COVID and this new variation of COVID that has caused not only Boris Johnson, the conservative Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a fellow in arms with Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell and basically the Republican Party in the United States and the Tories in the UK, right down to the point that Boris Johnson let the virus just rip wild through the British population for months because his science advisor, his health minister, was saying, well, yeah, herd immunity, that's a good thing. We should do that. And now Sweden, which, Tars, or what was his name? Engel, I believe his last name was. The Swedish economist said, well, we should just, protect the people who are vulnerable and let everybody else get sick and get immune. And now he has apologized. The King of Sweden came out and said this is stupid. Other Scandinavian countries are offering emergency support as Sweden has been melting down. Well, the UK is melting down. And when you allow a virus to rage like Boris Johnson did for a while, I mean, he put a stop to this a month or three ago. But here in the United States, we've never put a stop to it at the level of the nation, the federal government. In fact, we now know from internal emails that we've seen that the goal of the Trump administration was to infect as many Americans as possible, which means that the goal of the Trump administration and the Republicans in Congress who support them was to, frankly, kill as many Americans as possible. And they've done a very good job of that. They've killed over 300,000 of us so far. They have permanently disabled what will probably be 4, 5, 6 million of us so far. And they have given 18 million of us a pre-existing condition that the insurance companies will play with us about for years and years if we sign up for privatized Medicare, like Medicare Advantage, or if you're under 65 and you just are stuck with private insurance companies. So, that's where we're at. But now one of the downsides of letting a virus just rip is that there are lots more viral replications. The way a virus works is it attaches itself to the outside of a cell. It uses it's different for different viruses. It uses one of the surfaces, one of the sites on the surface of that cell as basically an entry point, as a keyhole that it fits into like a key and inserts itself into the cell, and then it pours its DNA or its RNA into the cell and hijacks the cell's own master control system. It's like a computer taking over a computer and causes the cell to convert all of its own physical material, the cytoplasm, and basically everything in the cell gets converted into viruses until finally the cell dies and bursts open and millions of new viruses are released into the body. So that's how viruses work. So the question is, what causes them to stick to that cell? And we know that on the COVID virus, it's this spike protein, and it's actually a fairly complex protein that is attached to the virus that is sort of like the tongue on a fly, where they it's got a little sucker on the end of it, and the fly lands on your hand and goes. You can see his tongue going tap 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 tap, and as he's eating, or sucking up the food. Well, the spike protein is kind of like that, and it appears. And now this is I'm trying to use metaphor to explain what I was reading doing a deep dive in the British Medical Journal over the weekend. But it appears that basically the new variation of this virus, it has a snappy new name. It's called the VIU 202012/01. In other words, it's the variant under investigation from December 2020. 202012/01, day one of December 2020. It's the N501Y mutation on the spike protein. And apparently what this does is it makes this virus essentially stickier for our individual cells and these little ACE2 receptors, these sites on the cells that the virus uses to inject its material into our cells so it can infect us. So whereas it used to be that if you were, in a store and breathing the air that everybody's breathing, you might breathe in a few dozen or a few hundred or even a few thousand virus particles, but it takes tens of thousands or maybe even millions of virus particles to be hitting you before a couple of them actually stick to a cell and begin the cell replicating, and boom, you've got COVID, right? And nobody knows the exact numbers, and I'm just throwing out for example numbers here, whether it's 20 viruses or whether it's 20 million viruses that it takes to produce an infection. One thing we do know is that the more viruses there are, the rapider the infection overwhelms your immune system and the more severe your case is. That's one thing that they're quite sure of. So it appears that this mutation means that instead of being exposed to 1,000 virus particles to get infected, now it only takes 500 or maybe 600. It's 74% more infectious. Instead of being exposed to 10 million virus particles, now it only takes 6 million or 4 million, whatever would be 74% more. And what that means for us, nobody's really sure of, but the best guess is that, we used to stand 6 feet away where everybody's wearing a mask because that would reduce the number of virus particles to the point where typically if any got through, they didn't infect us. It may be, and nobody is asserting this yet because we just don't know enough about this virus, but it may be that 6 feet no longer works. And this was part of the debate that I was seeing over at, as I recall, at BMJ, is should we raise the distance from 6 feet, 2 meters, to 5 meters, 15 feet, that people stay away from each other? Do we need to increase ventilation in buildings? Things like that. There are other questions as well. Break, Sean. There are other questions as well, like, is this virus, I don't know, maybe I just lost my audio here because, Sean, I think we're in a break. Is this virus, oh, we're in the break. I'm not hearing the break. So we'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We're in our free speech TV break. So anyhow, we don't know what to make of this quite yet, except that it's probably really not a good thing. And other questions: because this is a mutation on the spike protein and the vaccine targets the spike protein, does that mean the vaccine will be less effective? Best guess is no. The vaccine will be just fine because it targets multiple sites on the spike protein. There's all different kinds of pieces to that protein, and basically our bodies are producing it, but we're producing the unmutated version of it rather than the mutated version of it. So maybe they're going to want to tweak the vaccine, but again, this is so new, nobody knows. So I just wanted to bring you up to speed on it. There's also speculation. If you look at a heat map of the speed with which infections are increasing in the United States, not the number of infections, but the speed with which they're increasing. Los Angeles looks like it's like the epicenter of the United States right now, and on that particular type of heat map. And there's some speculation that might be the virus that came from the UK. Now, in the UK, they've got this thing called the COVID-19 Genomics Consortium, which is the government of the United Kingdom combined with, or along with the, let's see, how many? 12 different academic institutions, and they're continuously sampling COVID samples all over the United Kingdom looking for genetic variations. Our federal government, to the best of anybody's knowledge that I've been able to find, isn't doing squat. Because, of course, the Trump administration has been pushing this herd immunity strategy rather than trying to get the virus under control, which is why we have 300,000 plus, third of a million dead Americans. So we don't know here, and we won't know. probably for a little while, until some private academic institutions start, getting samples of the virus from Los Angeles and other hotspots and checking them out. But there's something funky going on here with regard to this virus, and I can't wait until I can get a vaccine. I can't tell you, and even though we don't yet know, I mean, broadly exactly how effective it is, it appears to be 94, 95%, 97%, depending on how you read the study. But it was these were relatively small studies of relatively small numbers of people, and now we're vaccinating millions of Americans, which is a great thing. And that means that we're going to have millions of examples of whether this works or whether it doesn't work. So, step by step, right? Meanwhile, the Vatican has come out and said, if this virus was developed using fetal tissue, it was tested on fetal tissue, and so the Vatican has come out and said, if you're Catholic, it's okay to get the vaccine, even though it was developed using fetal tissue. This was aborted fetuses. The wonders of science, right? It's okay. So if you're Catholic, you're in good shape. Sean, I'm still not hearing the break, and it seems to me like we should be in one right now. So, we have 20 seconds till a break? Huh, I wonder if my clock is off. Oh, until we come back. Okay, so I'll stop right there and wait until we come back. I still can't hear any music or anything. Oh, there's the break music. Aha! It was my clock was off. Okay. Okay. We'll be right back. Sorry for the pause and the screw up there. It's Murphy's Law. Anyhow, we'll be right back, and I want to get into the negotiations for coronavirus relief right after this. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. There's been a debate going on for 40 years about whether Reagan's, what George Herbert Walker Bush during the primaries in 1980 called voodoo economics, trickle-down economics, Reaganomics, whether it works or not. Does it work to stimulate the economy and help the lot of the average working person to cut taxes on rich people, like Donald Trump did, in 2017. $1.5 trillion tax cut for the rich. Does that help the economy? Well, the London School of Economics, the most prestigious economics institution in the world, just did the most comprehensive study on this, including 20 OECD nations, 20 of the richest nations in the world, including the United States and the United Kingdom, which is where this insanity began back in the early 1980s with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And the results are shocking. We lay the whole thing out in a new video that's over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. Is available. Start living a happier life today. You'll get 10% off your first month. So the new variation of the COVID virus is so sticky that it infects people more easily. Nobody's exactly sure what we need to do about that, other than don't expose yourself to the virus. And, that's just like, and meanwhile, the Vatican has said, yes, we get it that these vaccines were all tested on aborted fetal tissue. It's okay. Take the vaccine anyway. Now, meanwhile, we're watching what's going on with the Republican Party and the so-called stimulus. The Republican coronavirus, their negotiations over the last 6 months, I think, tell us everything we need to know about the Republican Party and why it needs to either be rebuilt from the ground up or die, a
a rapid death. I mean, this party, this Republican Party is just a mess. First, back in May, the Democrats in the House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion bill that funded state and local governments, prevented people from losing their homes or being kicked out for not paying their rent, covered $600 a month right into the early parts of next year, which is coming in very shortly, funded that into the next year, and basically, provided all kinds of money for lots and lots of programs that would help basically keep America from collapsing. $3 trillion. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate said, we're not even going to discuss it. We're not even going to bring it up in committee. We're going to hold no hearings on this whatsoever. Screw it. We're not going to do it. Too much money for average Americans, and there's nothing in here for the billionaires. So the Democrats came back with a $2 trillion compromise. And they said, well, how's this? And Mitch McConnell said, no. And in fact, he said, that's too much money for average Americans. $2 trillion. And even though $300-400 billion of it was leftover CARES Act money, and more than half of it was going to big corporations, giant corporations, and whatnot, the Republicans still said, no, that's way too much money going to average working people. So then Bernie comes out and says, well, how about a $1,200 check to everybody and $600 a month? And the Republicans go to work on it, and they say, how about a $600 check for everybody and $300 a month? And that's what they've arrived at now, finally. The one thing that was the flag that Mitch McConnell had been hanging on to desperately up until this point was language that he wanted in this COVID relief bill that would make it illegal for you to sue your employer if your employer forces you into circumstances that cause you to get sick or injured, including from COVID. And the Democrats just drew a line in the sand at that. And in fact, it was largely the House Progressive Caucus that drew that line in the sand and prevented that from, even negotiations on that. So McConnell went back to the drawing board. He was like, okay, we've got to give something to our donors, right? The billionaires, the multimillionaires, and the giant corporations in America who are entirely responsible or largely responsible for funding and entirely responsible for defining the marching orders for the Republican Party, they have to get something. And it has to be something more than just, $300 a month for average working people. They've got to get a hell of a lot more than just $300. They have to get a hell of a lot more than $1,200. So there's this provision in the law that says that if you own a business or if you're an executive, an employee of a business, and you have a business luncheon where business is discussed, then you can write off half the cost of that lunch. But there's one big caveat. That lunch, the entire cost of the lunch, half of which you're writing off, in other words, you're asking you and me, these companies are asking you and me through our tax dollars to pay for half the cost of their lunch because they're getting a tax deduction on it. We have to make up that government revenue with our taxes, right? So, first of all, they've got the taxpayers paying for half their lunch right now, but it has to be a reasonable cost. So, like when Paul Ryan would go to lunch with lobbyists and they'd buy him $600 bottles of wine, he was famous for that when he was Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker of the House. That would not have qualified as a reasonable expense. Even a $100 lunch in a Trump hotel wouldn't have qualified as a reasonable expense. And so they've changed. The compromise is, okay, McConnell, we'll give you, when you go to lunch with lobbyists, you can have a $600 bottle of wine like Paul Ryan did. And when business people eat in the fancy schmancy restaurants in the Trump hotel, they can deduct the entire expense. And so now it looks like Republicans are going to go along with it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The 3-martini lunch has nothing to do with martinis. It has to do with deductibility. That's just a handy phrase. But that's what's going on. They finally found something that they could give to their billionaire donors.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out, and he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
On the Science Revolution this week is Melissa Troutman and Joshua Boaz Probanik on their new documentary with Mark Ruffalo, Invisible Hand. The rights of nature movement captured in Invisible Hand changes nature's status from property to a living entity, which fixes a fundamental flaw within societies worldwide that contributes to everything from genocide to ecocide. Across the globe, communities are creating new legal systems that grant legal enforceable rights to nature, thereby honoring the rights of all people, too. This documentary shows when we enact and enforce the rights of nature, we restore the sanctity and equanimity of all life, including human beings. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are found. Let's pick up your phone calls and see what's up here. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today? Hello?
Hello. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Pam?
Tom, I'm well, but I'm mad as you know what. I'm upset about this relief. And first, Tom, I know that you always invite elected officials to come on, and you said they can talk about anything that's going on, legislation or anything. I'm hoping, I know the progressives come on, but I wish more of the moderates would come on and talk about this woefully insufficient. It's not even relief. I like what Representative Presley said. She said it's just survivor. You can basically survive on it, I guess. Tom, I heard Bernie Sanders say that, a large portion of the money is carried over from the CARES Act. Mm-hmm. Then he said, so really, this is tantamount to maybe $300 billion or $400 billion new money, which is nothing, absolutely nothing. Right. And it is abysmal and atrocious. Now, Tom, you've been in negotiations. I'm familiar with negotiations. And we know that you have to know your adversary. I knew that the Republicans would pull some last-minute crap like this. And then when I have Schumer and Clyburn try to pass it off as, oh, yeah, well, we did something before Christmas. Let's be grateful. Let's be joyful. We did something. I knew nothing good would come with Joe Manchin and that group that negotiated this time, the group of corporatists or centrists. Nothing ever good comes for working class people and families when it's a bipartisan initiative. That's my personal opinion. So now,
well, I think experience backs you up, Pam.
Tom, I ride around in my car, and let me just tell people, I'm in Chicago, and I live in one of those communities that are hurting, and I know rural communities are hurting. So, I donate to our Chicago food depository. I ride around with hot meals in my car, as well as canned goods, Tom. And I might have to stop on a corner and just deliver them to people on the street. And how in need people are, Tom, because they will take it, even in this midst of COVID. They will take food from a stranger, whether it's a hot meal or whether it's just, a packaged goods. I am disgusted, Tom. So when any Democratic elected official comes on your program, make them explain this in detail and answer for this. People like Mitch McConnell and this Republican Party, Tom, on the street, they would be called thugs. I want them gone too, Tom. I have no respect for Republicans, and I'm almost getting to the point where I can't even tolerate people who voted for these Republicans.
Yeah,
This is
I'm completely with you, Pam. And as you know, this show has a standing policy of any politician who wants to come on and take questions from either me or my callers. They can choose not to take questions from callers, but they're going to have to answer my questions. That door is open. And what we have found over the years is that by and large, those Democrats who take large quantities of corporate money are unwilling to come on not just this show, but any progressive show, and certainly unwilling to take questions from audiences. And it's not just Democrats. I mean, virtually the entire Republican Party has stopped doing, and this goes back almost 10 years now, stopped doing town halls. And a lot of corporate Democrats don't. Some do. Some try their best. We'll continue reaching out to them, Pam, and I will continue to try to hold them responsible. But we've got a small number of Democrats who figured out that if you do the people's work, the people will support you. And it's unfortunate. You want to make a final point? I got to move along here, Pam. So
sure, Tom. I just want to ask a question. What is the likelihood? Because they've also said, well, if we win Georgia and turn, Georgia completely blue, and then if Biden get in office, then we'll get more of a stimulus package. Tom, please let me know what do you think the chances of that really happening? And I'll hang up. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Here's what I think is really going on. I think that the only reason that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are willing to do this $600, $300 gift to America, and that's how they think of it. The only reason they're willing to do that is because down in Georgia, people are in pain and they're pissed off, and they're going to be voting for Ossoff and Warnock instead of Perdue and Loeffler, because they know that Ossoff and Warnock want to make sure that they get support. And right now, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, I guess it's pronounced. I keep wanting to go with the German pronunciation. Kelly Loeffler are opposed to people getting aid. They have been supportive of Mitch McConnell for the last 6 months in saying no to the HEROES Act, no to the $2 trillion Compromise Act. And, people are upset. And so now Mitch McConnell is going to say, okay, people in Georgia, we gave you something. Now vote for the Republicans. And I guarantee you that if Loeffler and Perdue win, if the Republicans win down in Georgia, and we'll be talking about this in great detail in the next hour with Greg Palast, if they win down in Georgia, you're not going to see another stimulus package make it through the Senate unless it has huge gifts for the billionaire class, the giant corporations, and the special interest groups, the racists, the gun nuts, et cetera, that fund the Republican Party. That's the only way it's going to happen. Otherwise, you can forget about it. Tom in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Tom, what's up? Tom in West Palm Beach? I'm not hearing Tom. Let's try Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, been a while since I've heard from you. I was starting to worry about you. I'm glad to hear that you're still okay.
Well, I gave the person who answered the phone the explanation of why you have not heard from me, and they will probably tell you later on a break. But it's just been, a long, hard fall for me. And but anyway. What I wanted to talk about is I have been watching C-SPAN a great deal because I can't watch regular TV. It makes me sick. My blood pressure goes up. And I have been watching Mitch McConnell push one nomination for a judge after another when they should have been working on the stimulus bill. He even had a nomination to the TVA. That got approved yesterday. And this infuriates me because they act like we, the people, don't matter, that we are nothing to them. They have become so arrogant with their financial segregation and their financial snobbery, they don't even think about what it's like to have nothing. We're going to have more homeless people on the streets. We're going to have more starvation. We have people who are sick. They won't even consider, expanding Medicare for people who have nothing. And this is, I'm mad. And I'm getting a lot of nasty, mad comments on my pages. And I'm doing what I can to calm people down. And I have been teaching people about Robert's Rules of Order. Go to your city council and learn. And here in Alabama, our governor finally made an announcement. There's $818 million of the CARES money that's been sitting there all this time that no one has applied for. It's going to expire next week. They never told people we had the money.
Wow.
One of the men in the Senate wanted to use $357 million to create a wildlife park in the west part of Alabama. Luckily, they stopped that, but they gave $10 million of this money to the lumber industry, which in Alabama is Georgia Pacific. They are going to come back into session in February and discuss how much tax Alabamians will have to pay on the $1,200 that we've already gotten.
Yeah. Amazing.
They're going to tax it.
Amazing.
Yes.
Of course they are. They're Republicans. It's way, average working people. I mean, taxes on people making under $70,000 a year this year are going up because that was built into Donald Trump's 2017 tax cut for billionaires. He's got to pay for it a little bit. So he's going to take it on our hide for the next 9 years. Every year, the taxes on people making under $70,000 are going to go up because of the Republican tax package. I mean,
That's one of the things that I've
nuts.
been
By the way,
teaching.
Norma, Louise just flagged me. Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. my time, I will be on C-SPAN, just FYI. So,
oh, good. That will be nice. That will be nice. But, I spend a great deal of time trying to teach people how this works. And one of my weapons is the Powell Memorandum. And I have come to the conclusion that these corporate people, which means our Congress is a corporate Congress. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's a corporate Congress. And I try to teach them how this works. And these people want the Powell Memorandum as a constitution.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we win in Georgia.
Yeah, it has been their marching orders essentially since 1971 when Lewis Powell wrote it. Norma, thank you. It's great to hear from you, and I hope all is well, and I'll keep you in my thoughts and prayers. Norma, thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be right back. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
You, my brother, you done stole my thunder once again, Thom Hartmann.
Oh, no. What did I do?
I got the police looking for you right now. Listen, the only reason why that stimulus bill passed, and you're right, is because Mr. McConnell can see what is going on in Georgia. And in case y'all don't know what's going on in Georgia, now check this out. These folks done got 75,000 new registered voters since the general election. The mail-in ballots that have started, record-breaking. And as you know from listening to the Thom Hartmann program, that favors the blue more than the red candidates. All right? Yep. So that's why he passed that, because they don't have the Republicans. I call them Republicans. The Republicans, they didn't have a message for those people down there in Georgia. And you're right, my brother, they're starving, and they were looking for a bone. And this was the bone that they threw them. And you're right, if those two Republicans get up in there, we ain't going to see no more money. We haven't seen no money in 9 months, 7 months, 8 months, right? So nothing's going to change just because of the year changed. And I'm going to close with this, my brother, with respect to the COVID-19 situation, right? When you got American commercial businesses in the forefront, people aren't trustworthy. When we know that the Cubans are the leading medical technicians in the world, and we know that the World Health Organization got some sharp people too, and we're turning our backs on both of them. So people maybe subliminally feel that, look like some politics being paid. So that's got something to do also with people not trusting taking that shot. And thank you, my brother. I'm going to give you a pass for stealing my thunder. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Morris. Always great to hear from you. I appreciate the call. Jose in Granada Hills, California. Hey, Jose, what's up?
Granada Hills.
Granada.
Anyway, yeah. I was hearing on Ralph Nader. He was talking about when Democrats raise taxes on the rich, it only hurts the middle class because the rich know how to get around the taxes. They, I forgot that program that the other guy did. Anyway, and so the Republicans, they say, well, right away when you guys get into office, all you're going to do is raise taxes on everybody. And like you said, it becomes the Santa Claus effect. So how do you combat that?
Well, you write the tax law in ways that the rich people can't figure out a way around it. I mean, we have been drilling Swiss cheese size holes in our tax code ever since 1981. And,
exactly.
And by the way, it's happened under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And it's time to put a stop to that practice.
But
it's just very straightforward.
They only see the Democratic part of it, but they don't see the Republican part. And right now we're too divided. It doesn't make sense how we're going to make anything come together.
Well, I think that it's going to take a collapse of the Republican Party, and I think it's on the verge of collapse right now. The one thing that it's got that the Democratic Party doesn't have is a bunch of very politically active right-wing billionaires who have built a network of right-wing think tanks, literally one in every state, right-wing organizing systems, one in every state, a machine to produce legislation, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, that has representatives from every state. They hold these meetings. And a right-wing radio network with over 1,500 stations constantly churning out right-wing propaganda 24/7, 365. The Democrats have none of those things. All the Democrats have on their side is truth. And so it gets a little complicated. Jose, thanks for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. It's actually about 15 seconds before the top of the, or between 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. And welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour, Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Marcus in Moulton, Alabama. Hey, Marcus, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how's it going on? Yeah, it's not done speaking with today, my buddy. But let's talk about the stimulus package and how it's really not a hero's act for non-custodial parents. Let's see what happened in the last one. $1,200 was seized by DHR because you owed back child support, which in turn, we know that DHR and child support gets a kickback from the federal government. Here in Alabama, they get $5.63 for every dollar of back child support they seize. So they get the $1,200 multiplied by that $5.63. Okay, if a person owes it, yes, gets it. If you want to be that
Marcus,
cruel,
you're making assertions that I don't believe are true.
Let
me rephrase that. If they are, I don't know anything about this. What's the point you're trying to make?
That's why I'm trying to give you this point. In anybody
right, but I'd rather be educated by an authoritative source than a caller on a talk show. God bless you. I appreciate the call and everything.
I'm the authoritative source.
But what's your point, Marcus?
My point is $1,200 was seized. Okay, they owe it. Take it. What I'm saying is, do non-custodial parents who owe back child support, are they less than human? Are they not affected by COVID-19 like everyone else? That's my only point. and I am the authority.
Well, and they are human, and the non-custodial parents who owe child support right now, who don't have access to a job because they're unemployed and the economy's in the tank because Donald Trump handled this virus like an idiot, are in big trouble. I'm with you, Marcus. They're in big trouble, and it's something that we need to address. Marcus, thank you for the call. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, I'm just calling because I called Nancy Pelosi's office and I've really tried to voice my displeasure. I'm sick of this Democratic leadership. Only because it just seems like even when they sound like they're trying, the final result.
But Charles, by the way, your phone is breaking up. But the bottom line here, Charles, is as long as Republicans control the United States Senate, the Democrats can continue passing bills in the House that will literally go nowhere, or they can give something to corporate America and billionaires to satisfy Mitch McConnell and his Republicans and attach something for average working Americans. I mean, those are basically the two choices right now. God willing, we'll take the Senate with Loeffler and Perdue being kicked out and Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff becoming, the new senators from Georgia. But absent that, this is the political reality, Charles.
Well, my thing is, I would have waited them out because you only have 30 days or just a couple more days till Biden is inaugurated. You have,
but on the day after Christmas, Charles, there's millions of Americans. I forget exactly how many million, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 million Americans who are going to stop receiving all of their unemployment benefits. And then on the first of the year, on December 31st, the protection against being evicted expires. So if we wait until January 20th to try to do anything, and that's in the hope that we can control the Senate, if we don't win 2 seats in Georgia, which is a hell of a high lift, we're going to be right back where we are right now. And if we wait until the 20th of January, when Biden is sworn in, or probably a week thereafter, you're going to have millions of people who are going to be thrown out of their houses and they're going to be on the streets. I mean, the Republicans will be very happy with that. That's going to, create a great opportunity to, jack up rents and stuff like that. But it's going to hurt a lot of people, Charles.
And my point is this. We are in a contentious election right now to regain the Senate. And the narrative would be at this point, we tried the best that we can for the American people. We want a certain amount, and the Republicans are intransigent. They don't really care, and they're willing to make you suffer. Go to the polls and show your displeasure. And this was what I'm talking about. And I feel as if that we have millionaires in the House and in the Senate. And then when it comes down to, to the kitchen table matters, when it comes down to Main Street, these people do not have a clue what we're going through. And, this...
Charles, I'm with you, but let's just, we're going to hit a break here in a minute, Charles. But let's just game this out. Let's say that the Democrats said, $600 as a one-time isn't enough. It should be $1,200, and $300 a month as a supplement isn't enough. It should be $600, and we shouldn't be having the $600 bottle of wine, 3 martini lunch things, and all that stuff. And we're not going to go along with this deal until something better comes along. I guarantee you. You're well informed about these issues, as I think most of the people who call into our program are. But the average American is not. Mitch McConnell went on the floor of the Senate this morning and said, us Republican senators have finally, we have acted and we're doing this because we care. Obviously, he's trying to win the election in Georgia. But if it hadn't happened, he'd be saying the Democrats don't want you to have anything. So Charles, is there a rebuttal to that?
So they can get a free lunch on us. They want a free lunch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they do. And I'm willing to give them a free lunch if it means that, 10 or 20 million Americans are going to get $300 a week. Charles, I totally get what you're saying. And I want the Democrats, part of the problem is that they're not messaging well. But, we've got to do something. Charles, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We humans have got to get a whole lot smarter, says Elon.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by Bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikochu spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history, not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. On the line with us is Greg Palast, the investigative journalist and author of How Trump Stole 2020, or at least tried to. GregPalast.com is his website. His Twitter handle is Greg_Palast. Greg, are you back from Georgia? Are you still down there?
I just arrived back from Georgia. I'm taking a Christmas break, a Hanukkah break, whatever, and trying to stay a little bit safer. But my God, it was skullduggery, fun and games, madness. You have no idea. Well, actually, I'll tell you what the idea is if you want to hear the craziness that went on. Please do so. Okay, so when we last left our tale, our last discussion, Black Voters Matter, the Hispanic rights group, Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, Operation Push, all these big voting rights organizations sued the state of Georgia because I discovered, if you remember, the removal of 198,000 voters illegally from the voter rolls of Georgia. They just said they moved, and they never did. They're right there. I'm talking to them. I'm filming them. They're saying, why can't I vote? I'm still in Georgia. So these major organizations and these top voting rights lawyers led by the National Bar Association, C.K. Hoffler, Fred Gray, who was Rosa Parks' lawyer back in 1954.
Like
he turned 90 at the trial. So here's what happened.
Right.
The judge gave us a trial, but he said you didn't, on a technicality, we didn't give enough notice to the state to get an injunction to get people back on before the election. So the lawyer said, well, okay, so let's give them notice. So we filed a new suit with new notice, so that'll be 2. And we notified the Secretary of State we're coming by to drop off the suit and give him notice, followed by the way, all the local TV cameras and CNN and everyone else. And so we went up into the Capitol, across from Brian Kemp's office, and to deliver the material to the Secretary of State with the cameras rolling. They locked the doors. They turned out the lights. They put on a little yellow taggy that with a cell phone number. We called that, and it just went to voicemail. So they were literally hid in the dark for 2 hours. So we said, okay, we have another route. Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter said, let's go another way. So we went over to another state office building, and lo and behold, there, hiding behind a door, was the director of elections for the state of Georgia. And he came out, and we, slapped the suit on him. But even more, the judge had said, listen, you've got real problems with your you've clearly removed people who haven't moved. There's terrible discrepancies in your purge list. That's the term for removing voters. And you should meet with the experts and meet with Black Voters Matter and Greg Palast. So here we were. And they said, so when are you going to meet with us? The judge said, meet with us. And he was hemming and hawing, and then also, and the cameras are rolling, so he's trying to get out of there. And at the same time, so then I asked him something else. The state told the court that they had checked with the post office. You have to use a licensee. There's licensees who can get in the post office computers, and because who knows if you've moved? It's the post office. And they said that they used the post office checked. We checked, and they didn't. They claimed that they hired some contractor named Anchor. We hired Anchor, that is Black Voters Matter and the Palast Investigative Fund. They said they never worked with the state of Georgia. They basically pulled a con on the court. And so I confronted them with it. I said, you actually, in effect, you perjured yourself to the court to get out of putting these voters back on the voter rolls. And don't forget, Tom, what's unusual about this case, here's about whether voters were wrongly removed from the voter rolls. And we know what color they are because we met them, Mr. Diaz, Mr. Watson, Martin Luther King's cousin, these people who've never left Georgia. And, so they conned the court into with this material to try to avoid getting these people back on. And the Republican National Committee joined the case on behalf of the state. And it's like, why is the RNC here? Why is the top hitmen, including Trump's, by the way, personal lawyers who are defending him against potential criminal charges in New York, why are they in the case? Why are they trying to stop voters from voting in Georgia? I mean, if you want to win the election, isn't the Democratic, small d, the Democratic way is to convince the voters to vote for you as opposed to blocking them because you don't like their color?
That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, you thought that. Remember in the 6th grade you were told, everyone gets to vote if you're a citizen? Well, welcome to Georgia. I mean, maybe in America, but not in Georgia. So we're still fighting it. And now we got this second lawsuit. So let's see what if they're going to continue to block these voters. We've gotten thousands back on. In fact, the judge noted that. And they said, this creates confusion. But the fun and games, literally, I haven't had targets of my investigations do that in a long time, literally turn out the lights, lock themselves in, and hide in the dark. And you have to understand, this is in the state capitol, across from the governor's office.
Is this because, this whole thing about, you've got to serve people, you've got to physically hand the papers to them. Is that a legal requirement? Yes. I mean, did you actually have to physically say, here?
Yes, we had to physically say, here are the papers, accept them. Now, you have to understand, we notified them, we called them, we issued a press release even, join us, so because the local, all the local and some national television wanted to get this and the reporters. And they literally hid, but they forgot that we figured, that we found that we literally hunted them down. It was ridiculous. You have some of the top lawyers in the United States. You have Black Voters Matter, Latasha Brown. All these people are all, they're hiding. So then we run off to this other state office and we catch them. We get them on camera. In fact, that's one of the things that the courts, that our lawyers are very concerned with. That we actually have videotape of them accepting the suit. We got the director of elections. We said, one of our lawyers said, "Oh, I see a timestamp machine there. Would you timestamp this?" This is all on videotape, because these guys will deny we ever gave them the papers. So they're playing games.
So
what the issue is,
what does this mean for this 190,000 Georgians who Kemp had thrown off the voting rolls before he became governor?
Yes.
If that is the genesis of this, what happens to those people now? Do they still have to? Will they be able to vote in the election?
Unfortunately, well, we think that we have about 20,000 back on, because we ran a heck of a campaign, including a giant electronic billboard featuring Rosario Dawson telling people, check your registration. So we had a big check your registration campaign so people would know if they were called. We had massive calling done by the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, in English and Spanish. So we got tens of thousands of people back on. We don't know how many exactly, but I'm going to tell you, over 100,000 people are going to show up and not be able to vote. We already got a lot of these people try to vote in the general, and they don't know what the heck happened. They don't know why they were removed from the voter rolls. And a lot of people then filled out provisional ballots, because the federal law says if you show up and you can't vote, you must, by federal law, be given this provisional ballot. But by Georgia law, they can't count the ballot. So you get to pretend you voted. And unfortunately, a lot of people, I talked to one voter, the Waymer family, they were knocked off. They were given provisional ballots, and they thought that they had voted because they were given provisional ballots. But I said, unfortunately, no. And it's a tragedy, because then people also don't realize that they have to re-register. So I hope this.
It's amazing.
We'll see what the
Greg,
what
stick
final
around.
result is.
I want to do a little deeper dive into this whole topic. We've got Greg Palast with us. He is the investigative journalist and author of his most recent book, How Trump Stole 2020. GregPalast.com, PALAST.com is his website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back in just a moment with Greg Palast. Stick around. And welcome back, Greg. It looks like, even though you so I understand what's going on, the court said you didn't give the Secretary of State enough notice. You gave them that notice over the last day or two.
Yeah,
that is not that's not in time for those people to automatically be put back in the voter rolls for the January. It's the 5th, right? The election.
Well, we have, like I say, we have the best voting rights lawyers in the country, and they're going to try to get another injunction, see if we can get them back on. It's ridiculous. And again, the fun and it's absurd. You have the Secretary of State hiding in the dark, trying not to receive a legal paper while the cameras are rolling. It's nuts. It just shows to what lengths they will go. So we will try.
That was Rassenperger?
Rassenperger, that's really his name. And, but this is just one of the games. I mean, one of the things I should say is that I wish that were the only evil thing that they were doing, the only Jim Crow trick. I was down in Cobb County, which is normally Republican. They voted for Biden in Cobb County.
Oh, I used
Georgia.
to live there in Cobb County. Yeah. We were the ones who sent Newt Gingrich to Congress.
Yes. So Newt Gingrich's county went for Biden, and so they panicked. So there are 11 early voting stations in Cobb County. There were for the general election, and now they're panicked that all these Democrats and liberals, black folk, brown folk are coming in by the thousands to vote early, so they closed 6 of the 11 voting stations in Cobb County, all the voting stations that were closed were in African-American neighborhoods. I mean, this is not like 1955. So they literally closed the 6 early voting stations in Cobb County that were in the African-American neighborhoods. And then, of course, people moved to the other voting stations where you ended up with 3-hour lines. By the way, Tom, the turnout is way above the presidential election, which was a high turnout to be. That was a record turnout, and that record's being busted in the early voting right now. Every day, lines 3-4 hours long. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, people are not going to be dissuaded. They can move the polling stations to the Arctic, and the public is going to show up. I mean, people are going to vote.
Yeah, the question is, will their votes be counted?
Well, this is a big problem because, for example, 3 voters, one of the things that people are doing, I mean, one good sign is that people are not mailing in their ballots. I can't tell you how many people have contacted our, GregPalast.com to say, I mailed in my vote 10 days before the election, 12 days before the election, and they said it was late. So people are now going to drop boxes. But 2 of the 3 voters that I encountered putting votes in drop boxes forgot their return address on the envelope. They figure, well, I'm dropping it off. It's, I don't need a return address. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. They'll do anything to knock out your vote. It is ugly. And any little mistake on that mail-in drop-off ballot that people are putting in those boxes because they don't want to wait. Some people can't and don't want to wait 3 hours. In addition, we have the GOP. You ready for this? They're putting cameras above the drop boxes to try to identify people they say are illegally dropping off ballots because you can't drop off someone's ballot unless you live in their household. Wow. I mean, so they run a spy network to say, that's crazy. Not someone living in that household that dropped off the ballot. It's nuts.
That's crazy. Stick around. We'll be right back. We're talking with Greg Palast. We'll be right back. It's coming up on... On the Science Revolution this week is Melissa Troutman and Joshua Boaz Probanek on their new documentary with Mark Ruffalo, Invisible Hand. The rights of nature movement captured in Invisible Hand changes nature's status from property to a living entity, which fixes a fundamental flaw within societies worldwide that contributes to everything from genocide to ecocide. Across the globe, communities are creating new legal systems that grant legal enforceable rights to nature, thereby honoring the rights of all people, too. This documentary shows when we enact and enforce the rights of nature, we restore the sanctity and equanimity of all life, including human beings. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are found. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Greg Palast on the line with us. So, Greg, Louise and I used to live in Cobb County, and I had an opportunity every 2 years to vote against Newt Gingrich. And someday remind me to tell you the whole story about Newt coming to the public schools in a way that produced such a local uproar that one of my kids ended up homeschooling out of this. It's an amazing story. I mean, this is how politicized Newt had gotten our schools. And this was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It was just amazing. But in any case, did I hear you during the break we were talking, and did I understand you correctly to say that all of the early voting locations in Cobb County is about half black, that all of the voting locations in Cobb County in black neighborhoods were closed? And if so, was that Raffensperger who did that, the Secretary of State, or was it Brian Kemp, the governor?
So not only did the people vote for Joe Biden, but they threw out some of those county commissioners. So the lame duck Republican county commissioners closed those early voting stations. By the way, Tom, that is, the ACLU tells me that's completely against the law. Barbara Arnwine, the top voting rights expert in America, Professor Arnwine at Columbia University, she was there in Cobb, and and so there was pressure, so they reopened 2 of those. But that's just the beginning. We also had in Cobb County In Georgia, you have this weird system that anyone can challenge anyone else's vote or registration. So we have that organization, this right-wing and frankly racist organization called True the Vote, that is literally challenging, are you ready for this? 300,000 voters on the Georgia voter rolls, overwhelmingly voters of color and young people. 300,000, because any voter can challenge another voter.
Yeah, True the Vote is the modern
incarnation of...
Right, it's the modern incarnation of Operation Eagle Eye, the thing that William Rehnquist helped start back in Arizona in the late 1950s, early 1960s, where they would go to polling places and challenge voters, because Arizona had a similar law, and he used that to challenge Hispanic and Native American voters for years. I mean, that's how William Rehnquist made his chops in the Republican Party and started clawing his way up to becoming, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Was, his racist efforts to stop people of color from voting in Arizona. So, now we've got this national organization funded by racist right-wing billionaires. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, the whole thing.
Can you imagine? As I said, they're even having cameras above the drop boxes so they can do face recognition and say, oh, that person doesn't live with the person whose ballot they dropped off. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Then you have to go through a challenge. Understand, if your registration is challenged, you can get pulled off the voter rolls, and then you have to go to a hearing. And of course, when's the hearing going to be? Next year, after the vote's over?
After the election.
You're talking 1/3 voters facing a challenge right now by these right-wing crazies. Well, I don't know if they're crazies. Maybe they're very smart, because maybe that's the only way that they can keep Mitch McConnell from unemployment.
So does that mean that the 300,000 names that True the Vote has thrown out of Georgia voters, not thrown out, has put forward, has challenged, thank you, that those 300,000 people, when they show up to vote or when they mail in their vote, it will be set aside and not counted?
That's what they're counting on, or if they mail in their ballots, it'll be set aside and not counted, and then there'll have to be a whole fight over each of those ballots. It's madness. Now, understand, there's 159 counties in Georgia, and each one will make decisions about this. And what we're worried about is, especially in those rural counties where we have literally bus loads of lawyers running around to try to protect the voters. And they can't stop every challenge. They can't challenge every challenge. It's completely out of control, the Jim Crow operation, completely out of control.
Yeah, and large chunks of rural Georgia, having lived there for 13 years, large chunks of rural Georgia are black counties. I mean, there's white rural Georgia and there's black rural Georgia. And, they're also, by the way, because there's massive early voting, and as you know, African Americans tend to vote on Sundays after church strolls to the polls, which is harder to do because of COVID. But the counties have stopped opening. Most counties, 120 of the counties, have not had weekend voting. That's against the law. They literally shut the polls because they know black people working during the week have to vote on weekends. Greg, they're Republicans. They don't care about the law. They'll deal with the law after the election. They only care about getting power. So if they can win the election, they can lose the lawsuits afterwards, but they still have that political position, don't they?
Well, that's what we're trying to convince the courts, that you have to act now. Otherwise, it's It's devastating. But you know what? People are energized by the fact that they're trying to steal a vote is actually energizing people, because they realize if someone's stealing your vote, it must be worth something. I've never seen turnouts like this. Every day is like election day. It's stunning, and people will not leave the lines. I'm just worried about the harassment that's going on. And, of course, and add to this the overlayer of the white supremacists running around with their, swastika tattoos, intimidating voters.
Right, yeah, it's amazing stuff. Greg, you're doing God's work. GregPalast.com, you can read all about it. Greg, great talking with you today. Thanks so much for an in-depth dropping by and giving us an in-depth story on what's going on. Really appreciate it.
I'll call you from Georgia.
Safe, my friend. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. GregPalast.com, check it out. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I will be right back with your calls right after this. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Coming up on us, 27 and a half minutes past the hour.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the people who are, supporters of our program, and it's about how the Democrats can never lose an election again. The people who are concerned about immigration, who are supporting Donald Trump's wall, or just are concerned about immigration and how illegal immigration has hurt the union movement in the United States, and it has to some extent, are gettable, as it were. I mean, maybe a third of them are actually just racist. Leave those people to Trump. You're never going to change them. But the people who are just concerned about the economics of it, and of having a labor market that's not regulated, I think that there's a very simple way that the Democrats can reach out to them, get their support, and peel them off the Republicans, peel them away from Donald Trump. And I lay the whole thing out. I think it's a very straightforward process. It's not rocket science, so you can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Thank you. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, what a day. So here we have the Fed. One of the main things, back to the topic from the first hour, just to put a pin on this, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. The last thing that I haven't mentioned has been Pat Toomey, the Republican from Pennsylvania. His efforts to make sure that the economy crashes as soon as Joe Biden is sworn into office. And the way that he's trying to do this is by crashing the stock market, on the assumption that the stock market controls the psychology of America, even though the vast majority of Americans have nothing or negligible amounts of money in the stock market. It's still the thing that everybody looks at, right? And so one of the main reasons that the stock market is as high as it has been over the last 6 or 7 months is that the Fed started buying stocks. The Fed created $7 trillion out of nothing, which they can do. And they started buying stocks and corporate bonds with that money in order to support the stock market, which is, the rich people in America. Well, if the Fed was to stop buying stocks, and in fact, if the Fed was forced to sell the stock they own, the stock market could fall in half. I mean, you could see a major drop in the stock market. And so the Republicans had originally attached legislation to this bill, this COVID relief bill, that says that the Fed can't do that anymore after January. Once Joe Biden is president, sorry, the Fed can't do that. It'll take a few weeks for that to take effect and really work its way through the system. So by the end of January, the stock market will have crashed and Joe Biden will be presiding over another crisis. Well, that was Pat Toomey's plan. And of course, with Mitch McConnell's and the institutional Republican Party's help, and all the Republicans were on board with that, and the Democrats called him out on it. And a few news shows, most on NBC, MSNBC, and CNN, pointed out exactly what I'm telling you right now. This was a Republican plan to crash the economy, period. They're saying, oh, we're concerned about the integrity of the Fed. BS. They want to crash the economy. They just intentionally want to crash the economy, and they're working their butts off to do it. And so this has to do with something called 13-3, Section 13-3, and it's an amendment to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that was put in place after the financial crash, the George W. Bush crash of 2008. After that crash, Congress said, okay, the Fed needs to be able to help us out here. And they wrote that into the law. And what Pat Toomey is trying to do is amend that. He wants to change that. And none of us have seen the actual legislation yet. I mean, maybe in the last, I've been on the air here for an hour and 38 minutes. Maybe it has come out during that time and I just missed it. But I don't think so. I think that this legislation, I don't think that we've seen the entire bill yet. It's going to be long. There's going to be lots of little sneaky gotchas in it, I guarantee you, particularly the Senate version. And they're going to have to reconcile this thing and make it work. But Pat Toomey now says, well, I've backed off. We have a more modest proposal to adjust the powers of the Fed. Now, what the hell that means, I don't have a clue. But hopefully we'll find out. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Nikki in Joplin, Missouri. Hey, Nikki, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Well, I wanted to talk to you about, I was really scared this week. I'm just depressed. Trump had that meeting up there with Sidney Powell, that wacko, and then what Flynn said. He's awful. He scares me, and Trump has 30 more days, and I don't know. I keep going back and forth. I get depressed, and then I'm happy that Joe Biden's coming in, and I'm sick of Republicans. The Democrats have to come in and clean up their mess every time, and I was surprised.
Literally since the 1930s. Literally since the 1930s, Democrats have to come in and clean up the mess after Republicans. Whether it was the mess after Herbert Hoover, and then it was the mess after Richard Nixon, and then it was the mess after George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan, and then it was the mess after George W. Bush, and now it's the mess after Trump. That's what Democrats do.
People
they walk behind the elephant.
People just don't care that are Republicans. Do they just have amnesia, or they just don't listen to the news, or they just think that the Republican Party is guns and the Bible and abortion? I mean, my uncle's been brainwashed by Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's all of the above, Nikki. You've got a bunch of single issue voters. I noticed the other day Steve Schmidt on TV said, I am now a single voter. My single issue is democracy. And he joined the Democratic Party. He said there's only one political party that actually supports democracy in the United States, and I'm going to join them. And he did. And there are single issue voters who only vote for whichever candidate wants to make abortion illegal. There are single issue voters around guns. There are single issue voters around tax cuts. They tend to be rich people. The Republican Party has pulled a bunch of those and racism. There are single issue voters who are racists.
I think that's one of the number one reasons he got so many votes, because
of course.
2040, it's not going to be, they're scared to death. My uncle's scared to death of people coming from the border. So he congratulated Joe Biden after he won. Then he listened to Newsmax and that Sidney Powell. Now he's saying on my Facebook, it'll be sweet when Trump wins. I mean, he got brainwashed within a week after, again.
Yeah, and I got another 6 emails today from Trump and the Trump organization, various Trumpers, and begging for money. And 75% of that money, 25% goes to the RNC, and even when they say it's for Georgia, 75% still goes into Donald Trump's private PAC that he gets to take with him after he leaves the White House and spend pretty much however he wants. That's how bad it is. Nikki, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you in Joplin, Missouri. Michelle in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Michelle, what's on your mind?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to, I had two questions, but I can narrow it down to one. So in Georgia, I was listening to the commentary. I came in late, but I understood that the votes are being challenged by Republicans. So why is it that we cannot challenge their votes? Just to do the same thing that they're doing to us.
Right. You know, it's conceivable. I mean, True the Vote is a fairly large organization that is very well funded, and to the best of my knowledge. And they've got lawyers, and they've got people on the ground, and they've got the whole right-wing network behind them. I think that for Democrats to try to organize a group of people to go challenge the votes of basically white suburban voters, I think, frankly, it would backfire on them. Just like I think this is backfiring on the Republicans. The whole world is watching the Republicans try to suppress the vote here. And I don't think over the long term it's going to hurt them, or help them, rather. And I think that doing this as a strategy would probably hurt Democrats. But I get where you're coming from, Michelle. It's like, why is it that they always get to get away with this stuff and the rest of us don't? And, it's pretty mind-boggling. Michelle, thank you for the call. Frank in Keene, New Hampshire. Hey, Frank. Been a long time since I was in Keene. What's up?
Hey, it's doing nice up here. Listen, I only have a simple question concerning Trump's increasingly unhinged and undemocratic attempts to distort the election, overturn it. What can the average person do I mean, we can call our Congress people and our senators, but New Hampshire is unfortunately all Democrat. It doesn't do much good to call the Democratic senators the representatives. So what? And of course, you can't call the representatives from the other states because you can only call them if you're in their district. So what can I do?
Well, one of the things that Bernie always used to suggest was, although this doesn't work with COVID, he'd say, rent the local town hall and then, invite everybody and then invite the member of Congress to come to face their voters. You do what you can on social media. I see that you're watching us on Facebook Live right now. Promote your point of view on that social media platform, even though it means you're making Mark Zuckerberg richer. And to the extent that you can support what's going on down in Georgia and things like that, go for that. But I don't know beyond that. Frank, thank you for the call. Sean, I think we're in a break, or maybe not. Maybe my clock is starting. Yeah, there we go. Okay, we'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's one of those days. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. David in Torrance, California. Hey, David, what's up? David, watching us on Free Speech TV in Torrance? You are on the air? Okay, David's apparently not there. Let's try Sherry in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've been following you for many, many years. Admire you so much. I wanted to mention that I think it would be very helpful for you to actually go into one of our counties here and see the election process as it happens. I've been on a board for years at Washington County. It's apparently kind of a model for other counties across the nation. They've at least educated people in Florida as well on what we do here. Remember that here we have a paper trail, and here I think the only transmission electronically is of the final result to the Secretary of State's office. Bev Harris came to Portland to lecture some years ago. She's been all over this black box voting, these issues, and she wrote a book back in 2003. And she has a website, blackboxvoting.org. The reason my hair's on fire so badly today is because it sounds to me like you may have missed the story that ran in Ross Story on Friday, why the numbers behind Mitch McConnell's reelection don't add up. It suggests to me that McConnell has stolen his election on crooked voting machines, perhaps owned by ES&S or I'm not sure, but a long time ago, Diebold and ES&S, I believe, were owned by brothers who both were stealing elections through software.
I read the article on Raw Story. I've seen it in multiple places. I also read a lengthy, essentially debunking of the story over at Daily Kos, where they're saying, wait a minute, guys. One of the charges, for example, was that there were more registered voters in a particular county than there were adults in that county.
Right.
That's the exact same argument that Republicans are using to purge voting rolls, aggressively purge voting rolls in states like Georgia. The fact of the matter is that when Louise and I moved from Washington, D.C. back to Oregon, we didn't tell Washington, D.C. we were gone. So, I may still be on the voting rolls in D.C. Now, it's been a couple of years, so odds are they finally figured out that I no longer live there and taken me off the rolls. But people don't tell states when they move out of state. And they don't tell states when they die, typically, or the death records are not cross-referenced with the voter records. So you always, in every state, in every county in the country, depending on how aggressive the Secretary of State is about keeping the voting rolls clean, you always have dead people and people who've moved on the voting rolls. It doesn't mean that they vote, but they're on the voting rolls.
Okay,
and,
okay.
Not
to contradict you, but this has nothing to do with voting rolls. It has everything to do with how it's transmitted and how software can the hacking of software.
Yeah, I think it's
please,
Sherry, I'm willing to acknowledge that it's possible. In fact, given who the Rosevich brothers were back in the day, although I don't think that they own ES&S anymore. There's a long and weird history to that, and they were end-time fundamentalist Christians. I get all that, and I know what happened to Don Siegelman down in Alabama, where a guy just changed the spreadsheet basically, and said, okay, here's the new numbers, and it's entirely possible that something like that happened in Kentucky. I'm just not sure that what we have right now is strong enough evidence that I'm willing to go on the air and endorse it. I want to see more work done on this. Sherry, thank you for the call. I'm concerned. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's about exactly why rich people, I'm talking about people who make more than $1 million a year marginally, and over $3 million a year, that group totally, why this group of people who are multi-millionaires and are literally bringing into the house over $1 million a year and over $3 million a year, why would they want to destroy Obamacare? Turns out there's a very simple answer, and a very straightforward answer, and a rather shocking answer, that they would put all this time and effort, years of work, into trying to kill Obamacare and throw 20, 30, 40,000 million people, off their health care. And you can see it, hear it, read all about it, as it were, over at thomhartmann.com in our new members-only video. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 9 minutes before the hour. Barbara in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Hey, my question is, who is paying for all these frivolous lawsuits that Trump is filing, trying to turn this election over? Is it taxpayer money, or is it coming out of his own pocket?
I guarantee you it's not coming out of his own pocket. I believe that they're being funded jointly by the RNC and the Donald Trump Re-election Committee. But exactly who's paying for it and who's doing what, Rudy Giuliani said he wasn't being paid. We don't know if Sidney Powell is being paid. She's been fired, but she's not been fired. And, it's all kinds of weirdness. But I guarantee you that nothing's coming out of Trump's pocket. He never pays his bills. The city of El Paso is still trying to recover, I think it's $1 million for security for when he came down there and did his rally, his border wall rally back 3 years ago. He still hasn't paid. There are literally dozens of communities around America where the police showed up to provide security for Donald Trump, were paid overtime by the city, and cities bill venues for that kind of security, where Trump and the Trump campaign have not paid those cities. It's happening all over the country. So it may be that he's not even paying his lawyers. God only knows. The quality of the lawsuits would indicate that they're not serious lawyers. But that's another one of the great mysteries that I think probably we'll figure out over the course of the next year, Barbara, once Trump is out of office. Thanks for the call. David in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? Good to talk to you again. Okay, here's my thing with Georgia. With all this suppression going on in Georgia, they're closing down the polls, and they're doing so many, I think, things that are against the law, like you said one time on 1955. How come there's not more of an uproar with the other Democrats? How come the other Democrats from other states, even Biden, should step in and say, hey, let's get the Justice Department going on here? This is against the law, trying to hold people from voting. And just to answer the lady who went on before me, who said that she thought the machines were rigged, I don't think so, because if that was so, then they won't need to stop the polls and close down the polls, that is, and stop people from voting, because automatically they could cheat with the machine. So why stop the people from voting? But
well,
anyway,
she was talking about Kentucky. Not
right.
Georgia.
Mitch
McConnell went from polling at 19% to winning by 54% in like 3 days, which has got a lot of people scratching their heads. But to your earlier question, David, here's the problem: if the government of Georgia had decided that they were going to go around and challenge people who own guns, and say, go door to door, knocking on doors and say, do you have a gun? And if somebody said yes, they'd say, well, I don't think you have a right to have a gun. Give it up. We're going to take away your gun. If they tried to do that, they would be stopped by the courts, because the Supreme Court in the Heller decision a couple of decades ago ruled that Americans have an absolute right to own a gun. So you have a right to own a gun. And if the government tries to take away your gun, they have to go to court. You don't have to go to court. They have to go to court and prove why you're such a dangerous person that you shouldn't own a gun. On the other hand, you don't have a right to vote. The Supreme Court ruled in Bush v. Gore in 2000, there is no constitutional right to vote. And so if the state of Georgia wants to take away your vote, they don't have to go to court to take away your vote, like they would have to go to court to take away your gun. All they have to do is just do it. They just take away your vote. If you want to get your vote back, you've got to get Greg Palast and the ACLU and a bunch of lawyers. You've got to sue the state. So it's upside down. It should be that we have a right to vote and a privilege to carry a gun. But instead, we have a right to a gun and a privilege to vote. And we need to have an absolute right to vote written into the law. And that was what H.R. 1 did. That's what the Democrats did with the very first piece of legislation they passed 2 years ago, when the Democrats finally took over the House of Representatives. And Mitch McConnell has consistently, steadily refused to even allow a hearing on the bill that already passed the House of Representatives with Republicans as well as Democrats. So that's what's going on. It's flat out nuts. David, I'm sorry, I got to run. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Randy, we have a little less than a minute. You got a quick one?
Okay, Tom, quick. On the reference to ES&S, I went on WikiLeaks, and I believe that ES&S is owned by the Omaha World Herald, which is in turn owned by Berkshire Hathaway or Warren Buffett. And it has changed hands in the last few years. And I'd like to touch on one other deal. The governor that with the election in question with the ES&S connections
Right.
in the last
You're
election.
talking Kentucky?
Right. No, there's no wonder why he couldn't step up and say something on the behest of Donald Trump to try and swing an election for him when he has so much
Well,
dirt
Andy
behind him
Beshear
already.
is the governor of Kentucky, and he's a Democrat, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. But I you know, we need to raise hell. I mean, the bottom line is now, and thank you, Randy, now at least it's part of a national conversation. What's with voting machines? Why aren't we voting on paper like every other democracy in a developed democracy in the world? Let's start voting on paper.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens, that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to do a deep dive into nuclear power, nuclear waste, nuclear weapons, all things nuclear, with one of the experts who I have tremendous respect for, Kevin Kamps. He's the nuclear waste specialist over at beyondnuclear.org, and the Twitter handle, of course, @beyondnuclear. And Kevin, welcome back to the program. I heard, first of all, that NASA is working on space-based nuclear power. Do I have this right?
Yes, they just put out a document. It's kind of, hopefully, Trump's last hurrah on the subject before leaving office. But talk of lunar-based nuclear reactors for electricity. And certainly with the Space Force, a lot of talk about nuclear-powered weaponry in space. So, yeah, it's something that's been talked about for decades, and there are very few people following it. There are some great groups like the Global Alliance to Keep Space for Peace, and our board of directors member, Carl Grossman, who's an investigative journalist, is on that board as well. And he's one of the few investigative journalists who has tracked this now for decades.
So what baffles me about this, Kevin, is that the sun is not impeded by clouds in outer space. I mean, I suppose if you get on the dark side of the moon, you got a problem, but by and large, there's a hell of a lot of sunlight out there, which you would think could power pretty much everything. I mean, aren't virtually all the satellites, and there's hundreds, maybe thousands of them going over our heads right now, aren't virtually all of them powered by the sun?
Yeah, there's tremendous solar potential for space propulsion, and it just, gets to the heart of the matter. I mean, a lot of what's being discussed about lunar exploration or colonization, but also Martian, has a militaristic side to it. And so nuclear would be very concentrated power. Yeah, that's true. You could power weapon systems with it if you wanted to. And unfortunately, that seems to be what the U.S. military-industrial complex is interested in. It's not about exploration per se. It's about dominance. They use that kind of language. And, there was a space probe called Cassini that was quite infamous, and it had a radio thermal electric generator on it, which was powered by plutonium-238. And as Carl Grossman in his writing showed, that deep space, deep solar system probe could have been powered by solar, but instead we're using some of the most hazardous compounds humans have ever generated and polluting our solar system with them, because that is flung out there. It's, of course, never going to be brought back or cleaned up.
Wow. And it seems like there's even a danger in launching something like that. I mean, what if the launch blows up?
Yeah, that was an amazing revelation that Carl got the scoop on back when Cassini was launched. The NASA safety officer who prepared the environmental impact statement said that, if there was a rocket explosion on takeoff, like happened with the Challenger, or if during the Earth swing by, they used the Earth as like a catapult to propel the probe further into space, it came very close to Earth and luckily didn't re-enter the atmosphere because it had some 70 pounds of plutonium on board. And that could have been a hazard for 5 billion humans, was the main point, if that plutonium had vaporized in the Earth's atmosphere. And that NASA safety officer actually resigned from the project because NASA was going forward despite the risks to 5 billion human beings.
Absolutely amazing. I want to get into what's going on with Fukushima. I want to get into what's going on with nuclear power here in the United States. I know we've got some time here to talk. But as a starting point for people, it's been a long time since nuclear power has been at the top of the national debate. And so there's probably some people listening who literally don't understand what nuclear power is, how fusion reactors work, what the difference is between fusion and fission. You want to give us a little primer on this, in a couple of minutes, or over the course of a couple of minutes?
Well, most nuclear power in the world, here in the United States and other countries, for electricity generation, for example, the fuel is uranium, and specifically it's a fissile uranium, which is uranium-235. You can split the atoms of uranium, and that's what generates high-level radioactive waste. These are artificial elements, cesium-137 as one example. But the heat given off from the splitting of the uranium-235 atom is what boils the water that turns the turbine that generates the electricity. So that's nuclear power. Nuclear weapons.
That's a natural process, isn't it? I mean, those are relatively unstable, the radionuclides, that what is it called, the actinide strip in the periodic table. These are compounds that are normally giving off protons or electrons or whatever. They're degrading into, ultimately they end up as lead, right, among other things. But that's a normal process, and that's why you have to concentrate uranium so heavily to get enough mass of naturally dissolving, fissioning, breaking up of uranium that it'll produce heat as a byproduct of that. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, uranium is a natural element, and it is in the Earth's crust. And what's artificial about it, like you said, is the mining of it, the bringing it up to the surface, to the biosphere, the concentrating of it, and then the enrichment of it. So in nature, uranium-235, which is fissile, can be used as an atomic fuel, is less than 1% of uranium in nature. It's 0.7% of uranium in nature. It has to be concentrated or so-called enriched in uranium-235 content. If you go from 0.7% uranium-235 up to 3 to 4%, that's much of the nuclear fuel in the United States, although they've been increasing that percentage of fissile uranium-235 up to higher and higher levels, leaving the fuel in the reactor cores longer. And then on the weapons side of things, it's a similar process. The Manhattan Project is what brought a lot of this into the world, unfortunately, this artificial splitting of atoms. And it was announced at Trinity, New Mexico, at Hiroshima, at Nagasaki, Japan. Again, in the case of Hiroshima, the splitting of uranium atoms that vaporized blocks of a city. And then at Nagasaki, the splitting of plutonium atoms that vaporized an entire city, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And then you mentioned fusion, which is not the splitting of atoms, but it is the combination of hydrogen atoms to make helium atoms. But yet again, in that artificial union of hydrogen atoms, tremendous amounts of energy are released. And that's how we went from atom bombs to thermonuclear weaponry. Instead of 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of dynamite at Hiroshima, 20,000 at Nagasaki, we went to orders of magnitude greater bombs, worse bombs. We're talking now megatons of explosive power from fusion.
Mega meaning 1 million tons. And that's basically how the sun works, is it not? Isn't the sun just a giant ball of hydrogen that is constantly, essentially burning? I mean, it's not literally burning because it's not oxidizing, but under great pressure and high temperatures, these hydrogen atoms are merging with each other to produce helium, and then those merge with each other to produce all the other elements in the periodic table, and ultimately the stars die and blow up, and that's, you know, where everything you see on this planet came from, right? Everything we see, everything we can see, with the exception of hydrogen, which we can't see, is produced in the death of a star at the end of its life as a fusion reactor. Is that right?
And the great thing about our solar system is the distance from the sun to the Earth, 92 million miles. It's a fusion reactor in the sky, but it is very far away and makes Earth habitable. So unfortunately, you know, these forces that we're unleashing into our living environment are destructive of life.
Right. So let's get into exactly what's going on where, and start with Fukushima. We're talking with Kevin Kamps. He's the nuclear waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. BeyondNuclear.org is the website, and the Twitter handle as well. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Kevin Kamps is with us, talking nuclear, right after this. And welcome back. Kevin, before we dig into Fukushima, I want to get into that right after the break, after the next break. But tell us how how did we end up with over 100 nuclear reactors in the United States? Whose idea was this? Who sold this, and how?
Well, our nuclear history began with the Manhattan Project, which was the race to build the atomic bomb that was used against Japan at the end of World War II in 1945. And then the Navy was nuclearized. Subs had nuclear reactors put on them. And then the first commercial so-called civilian reactor was actually built by the nuclear Navy at Shippingport, Pennsylvania, by Admiral Rickover and his nuclear Navy nuclear engineers. And that was the first civilian reactor. And then, you know, by the time of Nixon, there was talk of having 1,000 reactors in this country by the year 2000. Luckily, that didn't happen. It was closer to 130 that actually got built. So thankfully, 870 were canceled before they were built.
So why did Congress pass the Price-Anderson Act, and what is that?
Price-Anderson is a nuclear liability scheme, and the way it works now, and this dates back to 1957, it was supposed to help this fledgling nuclear power industry get onto its own 2 feet. Well, that was a long time ago at this point, over 60 years ago. So they've had this subsidy, which is worth billions of dollars per year in insurance premiums the nuclear industry doesn't have to pay. So if we were to have a major disaster in the United States at an atomic reactor, it would take the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to declare an extraordinary nuclear occurrence, which they've never done. They never even did it at 3 Mile Island. Then it would take Congress appropriating the money. And the way it would work is industry would pay for the first $12.5 billion in damages, and then taxpayers would pay the rest. But as I mentioned at 3 Mile Island, the only compensation that was paid to families that suffered was out-of-court settlements with the company. And then those settlements were locked under non-disclosure agreements. So that's why a lot of the truth about 3 Mile Island has never come out, because if families talked, they would lose that money.
So you're talking about the families near 3 Mile Island, a movie that came out at the same time that, I mean, Louise and I watched the China Syndrome, the Jane Fonda movie. And when we got home that night, that was when 3 Mile Island was melting down, or maybe it was the next day or a couple days later, but it was like right around that time. And, you know, which was kind of mind-boggling. But I don't think most Americans know that anybody was injured. I mean, that's the position of the nuclear power industry was, yeah, we vented some, you know, radioactive gases, but they just diluted and went away, and nobody was hurt. Everything's good. Nobody died. Is that not the case?
They've stuck by that story, but I mean, if you look at the works of like Robert Del Tredici, who put out the book The People of 3 Mile Island in 1980, or Harvey Wasserman, who interviewed large numbers of people, especially the work of epidemiologists like from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who found elevated levels, statistically significant, of things like lung cancer in exactly the wind directions that the radioactivity from the meltdown traveled. And, you know, for 6 years, from 1979 until 1985, the company, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, all denied that there'd even been a meltdown. They said, okay, there's been some fuel damage. They had a 50% meltdown.
Wow, amazing. Kevin Kamps is with us with Beyond Nuclear, beyondnuclear.org, if you want to do a real deep dive and understand what's going on. They also publish a regular newsletter. Just, you know, it comes in email. There's no charge, no ads, nothing like that. You can sign up for that at beyondnuclear.org. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at thomhartmann.com. So we're talking with Kevin Kamps, the nuclear waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. By the way, Beyond Nuclear has a regular newsletter that they send out periodically when there's nuclear news. There's no charge, there's no ads. You're not going to get hustled for anything. It's I've gotten it for years, and I found it very, very useful. BeyondNuclear.org is where you can sign up for that. Kevin, let's talk about Fukushima and what happened in Japan. It's been off the radar screen of Americans for a long time. So if you want to just give us a little bit of backstory and then tell us where we're at. We've got about 5 minutes here till we hit a break.
Well, March 11th of 2021, incredibly enough, will mark 10 years since the beginning of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear catastrophe in Japan. So what happened on March 11th of 2011 was initiated by a 9.0 earthquake off the coast, which sent a 45-foot tall tsunami into the nuclear power plant. And what resulted over the next few days was the meltdown of 3 of the 6 reactors at that site, followed by large-scale explosions and a catastrophic release of hazardous radioactivity to the environment. And here we are 10 years later, and they are still working hard over there, thousands of workers, to try to put a lid on the situation. So fortunately, the large-scale releases that took place over weeks, months, even years after the beginning of this catastrophe have dwindled to some extent. There are still radioactive releases for sure, but some of the shoes that could still drop at Fukushima Daiichi include more than 1 million tons of highly radioactive wastewater, which is something like 300 million gallons of highly radioactive wastewater that have accumulated over the past 10 years. And unfortunately, learning no lessons, the Japanese government, Tokyo Electric Power Company, with some American advisors, are talking about dumping that wastewater into the ocean, an intentional, conscious pollution of the Pacific Ocean with highly radioactive wastewater. That's what's being proposed.
So what's the consequence of that? I mean, the ocean's a big place, right? Doesn't that dilute all that radioactive water?
Well, folks like Dr. Rosalie Bertel pointed out that dilution is not the solution to radioactive pollution, because what's going to happen is that tritium, it's mostly tritium, but there are other radioactive poisons in that wastewater, will reconcentrate. It will bioaccumulate, biomagnify up the food chain, and humans are at the top of the food chain. So guess who is leading the opposition to this intentional dump? It is the fishing cooperatives of Japan, who've already been so devastated by this nuclear catastrophe, but this would be the final blow to their livelihoods, because people will avoid that seafood that's caught there.
Can you explain bioaccumulation, please?
Well, it's where small organisms are eaten by larger organisms, and the radioactivity builds up in concentration as larger and larger organisms eat it, ingest it, and so humans would get the worst of those doses, unfortunately.
So they pour, the water itself is not radioactive. It's contaminated with radioactive compounds. They pour that water into the ocean. It gets diluted. It's fairly spread out. Algae absorb these things. Plants of various kinds will absorb these things because some of these elements, like strontium, they think it's calcium. Cesium, radioactive cesium, they think it's potassium. Correct me if I'm wrong at any point on this. And
no, you're right. The only thing I would mention that you had just said was that it's not radioactive water, and you're right. Strontium and cesium are contaminants in that wastewater, but incredibly, tritium, radioactive hydrogen, it is radioactive water. The hydrogen atoms in the water molecules themselves contain tritium, so in that sense, it is radioactive water, and it can't be filtered. That's the point. It's so small on the periodic table that at industrial scale they can't filter it. They could in a lab. So really the solution to this problem that they have, this burgeoning collection of wastewater, is to let it decay. Luckily, tritium has a shorter half-life of 12.3 years. So if it's stored for a century or so, it's mostly going to decay away with time.
Right. Half-life means after 12.3 years, half of the radioactivity is gone. At 12.3 years later, a quarter of the we're down to a quarter. 12.3 years after that, we're down to an eighth. Do I have that right?
Right, and usually 10 half-lives is considered the hazardous persistence, but to be safe, you should go out to 20. So for tritium, 10 half-lives would be 123 years, but if you were able to store it for 250 years, then you'd be safer. There'd be less tritium.
Right. So these plants are absorbing these compounds thinking that they're calcium and phosphorus, which they need just like we do. Small fish eat the plants, and they absorb this into the tissue of their bodies. Medium-sized fish eat the small fish, and they absorb that into their bodies and keep it and hold it. Then bigger fish eat the medium-sized fish, and then we come along and we catch the big fish. This is how iodine, radioactive iodine, from burning coal goes into the air and ends up, in the ocean, and that's how tuna got filled with radioactive iodine or mercury. I'm sorry, with mercury, and it's the same process, this bioaccumulation. It's just mind-boggling. Anyhow, we're talking with Kevin Kamps. He's the nuclear waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. I want to get into what the state of nuclear power is in the United States, where we've got problems, what we're doing about storage. There's a whole bunch of issues here. Stick around. We're going to do a deep dive into the U.S. and nuclear power.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And nuclear weapons. We'll be right back with Kevin Kamps. Beyondnuclear.org is the information. Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles from their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years
and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City, by Irshad Manji.
The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since, since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. And welcome back. We're talking with Kevin Kamps, the nuclear waste specialist over at beyondnuclear.org. And Kevin, we touched briefly on how nuclear power came to the United States, and you know, starting with the Manhattan Project, and how the Price-Anderson Act, nuclear power was so dangerous and continues to be so dangerous that there is literally not any insurance company in the world that is willing to insure a nuclear power plant. And so, therefore, the federal government stepped in with the Price-Anderson Act and said, we will make the taxpayers the final insurers of the nuclear plants. So what are we getting for our money here? How many nuclear plants do we have in the United States? How many of them are the same designs as the one at Fukushima? That was taken out by a tsunami. Do we have to worry about that kind of thing here? Where are we at right now? What's the state of nuclear power in the United States?
I think of the 129 reactors that were built in this country, full-scale commercial reactors. There are still 94 operating at this time. So that means the difference have been permanently shut down, thankfully. But there are still 94. And of those, you asked about Fukushima's design. That's a General Electric boiling water reactor. And there are some dozens. There are a few dozen altogether that are either identical. There's about 20 of those. And then there's another 10 or so that are very similar in design. So that's about 30 of these Fukushima-style reactors here in the United States. They are located on the seacoasts. They are located on the Great Lakes. And yes, they are vulnerable to natural disasters, whether it be a tsunami, an earthquake, but also to tornadoes, to hurricanes. They're vulnerable to terrorist attack. They're vulnerable to accidents. I mean, 3 Mile Island, a different design, pressurized water reactor, had a meltdown because of a combination of design flaws and operator errors. And we have lots of, 2/3 of our reactors in this country are pressurized water reactors. So there's tremendous potential for disasters. It's getting worse because the reactors are now dangerously age degraded. Some of the reactors are more than 50 years old. There's one in upstate New York that's more than 50 years old. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is, in bed with the industry, it's supposed to regulate, are fine. They're fine with allowing reactors to operate now, not just 40 years, but 60 years, 80 years. There's even talk of allowing reactors to operate for 100 years, which is a joke. I mean, the longest one has operated so far is just over 50. But they're actually considering allowing licensing to go out to 100 years.
Well, why is that problematic? I mean, I'm living in a house that's 50 years old, roughly. It's still here. What is it about a nuclear reactor that age limits it?
Well, it's very extreme conditions and physical forces. It's the temperature. Reactors operate at something like 600 degrees Fahrenheit. There's tremendous radiation fields, gamma radiation, neutron radiation. Just one example, I'm speaking to you from my hometown of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and just 35 miles to the west of here is the Palast atomic reactor that's approaching 50 years in age. And it happens to be the worst embrittled reactor pressure vessel in the United States. So this 8-inch thick steel that comprises the reactor pressure vessel and the nuclear fuel and the nuclear reaction is inside of that has been bathed with neutron radiation for 50 years. And it's now full of microscopic holes, essentially. It's like Swiss cheese because the neutrons have damaged the metal. And the danger is, if they ever have to activate their emergency core cooling system to heat down the core to prevent a meltdown, that could be the final straw for the reactor pressure vessel. It would be like a hot glass under cold water, but just imagine adding a ton of pressure per square inch to that hot glass. So you could fracture through wall the reactor pressure vessel, at which time there's no contingency. You would have a meltdown for sure if this were to occur. And the last line of defense would be the containment structure, and those are infinitely fallible.
Yeah. So the reason, my understanding of how Fukushima melted down goes something like this, and please correct me if I misunderstand this. Nuclear reactors produce heat. I mean, basically, it's just we're using radioactive materials to boil water, and then using that steam that comes from the boiling water to turn a generator, a turbine that produces the electricity that we all enjoy. First of all, I have that part right? We don't take radiation and convert it into electricity. We take the byproduct of radiation is heat, and the heat is turned into steam, and the steam spins the reactors, right?
Right.
Okay, so then there's this waste heat that has to be dispensed with, that has to be gotten rid of. And in the event of a crisis, in order to stop the nuclear reaction, to stop the production of heat, there's a whole set of carbon rods that get lowered down into the core that basically block pieces of the radioactive material from each other, so they can't interact with each other in a way that produces that fission and produces that heat. And am I right so far on that?
Right. You interrupt the chain reaction and shut the reaction down.
Right. Okay. So for a reason that I don't understand, when the nuclear reactors at Fukushima got hit with a tsunami, there was damage to the buildings. But the biggest thing that took them out was that there were diesel generators at ground level outside these buildings that were producing backup power for a nuclear reactor that was running the cooling system, and absent the cooling system, the nuclear reactors melted down. Do I have that right?
Right. So even though the reactors at Fukushima did shut down when the earthquake happened, you have to cool those reactor cores for several days before they reach what's called cold shutdown. And that's when they depended at first on the primary electric grid to run the safety and cooling systems. But the earthquake had largely damaged the grid. So they were thrown onto these emergency diesel generators to, force the cooling water through the cores to cool them. And that, an hour, 50 minutes after the earthquake, came the tsunami. And because of the bad location, the bad design of the diesel generators, they were taken out. And it turns out that essential pumps on the seacoast, as Arnie Gunderson of Fairwinds Engineering has pointed out, they were also taken out by the tsunami. So you had lost all cooling, primary cooling, emergency backup cooling, all cooling was lost. And it just took, in the case of Unit 1, it only took some hours before the core began to melt down. At Units 2 and 3, it took a couple, 3 days. But it was, at that point, a race against time. They were trying to introduce cooling, and they just couldn't. Everything had been destroyed.
So and the American reactors are more or less the same design. So if a tornado, and our tornadoes are getting worse and worse and worse, we're now having these things called derecos, these mile-long, multi-mile-long tornadoes as a result of global warming. If a tornado takes out the power lines near a nuclear power plant, the nuclear power plant no longer has that backup cooling power, and then it tries to turn on its diesel generator, backup, cooling emergency power, and the diesel generators don't kick into action. If they haven't been tested recently or haven't been run, or the diesel fuel is full of gunk. Don't we have the same situation that happened at Fukushima?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, example, it was June of 1998, and a tornado scored a direct hit at the Davis-Besse atomic reactor near Toledo, Ohio, took out the grid. The grid was destroyed, and they were relying now on not 2 emergency diesels like they're supposed to have for redundancy. One was down for major repairs. They really just had the one. And they came precariously close to a meltdown situation. The one operating diesel kept breaking down. And so for 48 hours, they had to keep reviving it. And it was just a very near miss due to a tornado and dysfunctional emergency diesel generators. And Senator Markey has done a study. He's an important watchdog on the nuclear power industry in Congress. His study found something like 75 instances where emergency diesel generators did not operate when called upon.
Whoa. And so you don't need a tsunami with these kinds of nuclear reactors that we're using all over the United States to produce a Fukushima kind of event. Apparently we've just been very lucky, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Davis-Besse, and I mentioned age-related degradation across the country, but incredibly at Davis-Besse, their containment could collapse and cause the accident. Containments aren't supposed to cause accidents. That's how degraded it is.
Because of being bombarded by neutrons for decades, right?
Actually, that was a blizzard that damaged the concrete. That's what they say caused it.
Amazing, amazing. Kevin Kamps, we'll be right back. We're doing a deep dive into nuclear power. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of Kevin Kamps with Beyond Nuclear in just a moment. So, Kevin, I frequently get people calling into this program saying there are safe forms of nuclear power that don't require backup generators and don't require elaborate cooling systems. There are these pebble reactors, which sounds kind of cute, like maybe the way you decorate your backyard. and there's thorium reactors, and they're all good. What do you say?
Oh, we disagree. I mean, the pebble bed modular reactors, as they're so called, actually one of them in Germany had a large-scale radioactive release that they tried to conceal behind the Chernobyl accident because of the timing of the German and Ukrainian accidents. So pebble beds can have accidents. Thorium has nuclear weapons proliferation risks associated with it that are even worse than the uranium fuel chain. So we're very skeptical of all these pie-in-the-sky ideas that actually, a lot of them, including thorium, date back to the 1940s. So they have tried to deploy these technologies. It hasn't worked for a lot of reasons, from economics to weapons proliferation to unsolvable waste streams.
But the promise of all of this is incredibly seductive, right? That you can just, I mean, we're all used to mining coal out of the ground and burning it, but it goes away pretty fast. But if you could mine a radioactive substance out of the ground and put it in a box and have it generate heat and generate electricity for centuries, that seems really kind of cool if it could be done. Is there any way to do nuclear fission safely that we know of? And what about the possibility of nuclear fusion, of using hydrogen and binding atoms to each other rather than splitting them apart?
No, I don't think there are safe ways to do nuclear. I mean, a joke would be a 100-foot thick titanium reactor vessel, but that would cost trillions of dollars. It's not economic to do nuclear safety. That's why we have these bad designs. They tried to make it affordable to do, and it's still not affordable. It's off the charts expensive. I'm glad you brought up the mining, whether it's uranium or thorium. I mean, the uranium mining in the American Southwest, for example, has devastated the Navajo Dene country, the Pueblo country, and those indigenous peoples also in Canada and elsewhere around the world. They have borne the brunt of the hazards of uranium mining. And it's ironic, as Dr. Arjamaka. Well, uranium is a natural substance, but it is toxic. It is a toxic heavy metal. It's also radioactive. It even is a hormone disruptor. And so because the uranium mining and milling wastes were just dumped willy-nilly in the environment in places like the Four Corners, the people who live there, who are Navajo, Dene, and Pueblo, have borne the brunt of the health damage to their genetics, even in terms of cancer. A lot of the miners were sent down into the mines. These are Native American miners without respiratory protection, and they died young. And so there are whole communities of widows and orphans who lost the men in their cultures, in their societies, to avoidable radiation exposures. But it was cheaper and easier just to send them down into the mine and not warn them what the dangers were.
Wow. And we've been seeing that for a long, long time. We're talking with Kevin Kamps, the nuclear waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about New Mexico and consolidated interim storage and Texas as well. Stick around. We'll be right back. On the Science Revolution this week is Melissa Troutman and Joshua Boaz Probanik on their new documentary with Mark Ruffalo, Invisible Hand. The rights of nature movement captured in Invisible Hand changes nature's status from property to a living entity, which fixes a fundamental flaw within societies worldwide that contributes to everything from genocide to ecocide. Across the globe, communities are creating new legal systems that grant legal, enforceable rights to nature, thereby honoring the rights of all people, too. This documentary shows when we enact and enforce the rights of nature, we restore the sanctity and equanimity of all life, including human beings. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are found. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're talking with Kevin Kamps of beyondnuclear.org. Kevin, I understand that there is this thing called consolidated interim storage. What is that, and what does it have to do with Texas and New Mexico?
Well, one of the longest legacies of nuclear power is high-level radioactive waste, which we do not have a solution for. And here we are, more than a half century into this technology. And they had tried to dump it on western Shoshone Indian land in Nevada, and they didn't get away with it. That fight goes on. But now their plan B is to simply park it in the desert Southwest on either side of the Texas-New Mexico border. There's a company called Holtec International that wants to set up shop in southeastern New Mexico. There's another company called Interim Storage Partners that wants to set up shop in Texas by all of 0.37 miles. And then the water flows into New Mexico, and of course the wind blows into New Mexico. And what's ironic about these proposals is that New Mexico has already suffered immensely from the nuclear age. Los Alamos began it in 1943. You've got the uranium mining in northwest New Mexico. You had the Trinity atomic bomb blast in 1945 in New Mexico. And then you've got the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which is military plutonium being dumped in a salt formation in southeastern New Mexico. So it's really being treated as a nuclear wasteland. And this would be the most concentrated quantity of radioactivity yet. This is commercial high-level radioactive waste, something like 95% plus of the radioactivity of the atomic age is in this high-level radioactive waste, this irradiated nuclear fuel. So we have a national coalition that is fighting hard to try to prevent this environmental injustice from happening.
One of the things that the 9/11 Commission found, as I recall, was that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, when he was organizing 9/11, originally one of the planes was not going to hit the World Trade Center. It was going to hit the storage pool next to the Indian Point nuclear reactor, which would have the storage pool is like a giant swimming pool. It's filled with radioactive, it's former cores that have exhausted most of their radioactivity, but there's still a lot of radiation there. And if that plane had hit that pool, it would have sprayed radioactive material and all over New York City and basically rendered it unlivable for centuries. Number one, fact check me on that if I'm wrong on any of that. And number two, he called that off because he assumed that there had to be missile defense systems around that nuclear waste storage pool at Indian Point. Turns out there weren't, and there still aren't, to the best of my knowledge. Is this the situation in pretty much every nuclear plant in America, that they've got nuclear waste sitting outside basically in a swimming pool with a tarp over the top?
Yes, the indoor wet storage pools for irradiated nuclear fuel are quite vulnerable because they are just warehouse structures. They are not in the radiological containment that surrounds the reactors themselves. And ironically, there are decades worth of cores, as you said, in these pools. And if the pool water is lost, if the fuel catches fire, there have been studies done. You are right. Ed Lyman, who's now at Union of Concerned Scientists, did a study of what would happen at Indian Point if it went up in flames, and it's unimaginable, the consequences in terms of deaths and property damage. And some other Princeton researchers, von Hippel, looked at a pool fire at the Peach Bottom atomic reactors on the border of Maryland and Pennsylvania. And depending on the weather conditions, they found that the damages could be into the trillions of dollars. The number of Americans forced to become nuclear refugees could easily be in the millions. Major cities could be lost to radioactive contamination throughout the mid-Atlantic and the northeast of this country. So pools are a huge risk. And
so is the only solution to these pools to take the waste that's in them, put them on a train and truck them to New Mexico? Is that what's being proposed? Is that, to bring it back to this New Mexico-Texas consolidated interim storage thing?
That's the proposal, but what the environmental movement has called for 20 plus years now is called hardened on-site or near-site storage. Take it out of the pools, put it into fortified dry cask storage that accounts for the possibility of accidents and attacks, monitors the situation closely to make sure it's safe. Instead, they're talking about rushing this onto the trains of this country, onto the rails, and bringing it through metro areas. This would be the first time that large amounts of highly radioactive waste would be moving through the major cities of this country, which itself would be a terrorist target, but also a severe accident risk of large-scale releases of radioactivity.
Have they, with Indian Point and other sites like that that are near major cities in the United States, Have they yet hardened those waste facilities? Or put
No,
anti-missile
there's
systems
still-
or anything like that?
No, there's like 70% of the waste is still in the pools, even at places that have dry cask storage. And the dry casks they're using, provided by companies like Coltec, are not safe themselves. So those dry casks still need to be hardened. Operating nuclear power plants are wide open to attack, truth be told. So no, they have not done that work.
But
They need
an operating nuclear power plant at least has several feet of concrete around it, doesn't it? I mean, would a jetliner be able to penetrate that? Or even a small plane?
Well, those pools are vulnerable. The pools are vulnerable. They're just in warehouse
Pools
type
are the
structures.
places. Yeah, I get it. Okay. Kevin Kamps, Beyond Nuclear. You can read all about it. Kevin, great talking with you today. Thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure, always. And once again, a reminder, Beyond Nuclear has a newsletter, no cost, no ads. You can check it out at beyondnuclear.org. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with the latest weird outrages from the Trump administration and more hope that, hey, it's only a little more than 700 hours away. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Be good to somebody today. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.